In this lesson, you will learn how to configure the sensors attached to your robot and why doing so is important. The VEX Cortex enables you to incorporate a wide array of sensors into your robot, providing valuable sensor feedback for intelligent decision making. There are 8 analog sensor ports for sensors like the line follower, potentiometer, and accelerometer, and 12 digital sensor ports for sensors like the limit switch, shaft encoder, and ultrasonic rangefinder. In earlier lessons, the configuration steps we followed with the motors connected to the robot were optional, done only to make the task of the programmer easier. Only motors can be plugged into the motor ports, so Robot C can accept default names like Port 2 and Port 3. Since the Cortex allows a variety of sensors to be connected, and each type of sensor works differently, configuring them is not optional. Our robot model has 2 shaft encoders, an ultrasonic rangefinder, a limit switch, and a potentiometer. The limit switch and potentiometer will allow us to fine-tune our control over the robot's arm, so let's configure them. Begin by opening the Minefield Retrieval Arm Control program from the Remote Control section. Save it as Fine-Tuned Arm Control before making any changes. Now, before we can incorporate feedback from the limit switch and potentiometer in our code, we need to tell Robot C what types of sensors are connected and to which ports. Begin by opening the Motors and Sensor Setup window. The limit switch is a digital sensor and is plugged into digital port 6 on the Cortex. So select the tab labeled VEX 2.0 Digital Sensors 1 through 12. We need to give the limit switch a descriptive name that we can use to reference it in our code. Like motor names, sensor names must be all one word, not already reserved by Robot C, and contain no special characters. In the name text box next to digital 6, type front limit and set the sensor type to touch sensor from the drop-down menu. Now, the potentiometer is an analog sensor connected to analog port 6. Select the VEX 2.0 Analog Sensors tab. In the name text box next to input 6, type arm pot. And set the sensor type to potentiometer from the drop-down menu. As a side note, if you're ever unsure whether a sensor is analog or digital, you can use these drop-down menus as a reference. Robot C will only allow you to configure analog sensors in the analog ports and digital sensors in the digital ports. Press OK to finalize your changes. New Pragma configuration statements will appear at the top of your program, displaying the sensor port, name, and type. With the sensors configured, you are now able to incorporate feedback from them into your code. In this lesson, you learned how to configure different sensors for the Cortex using the Motors and Sensor Setup window.